I'm Jeffrey Say. I'm the CEO of Managing Director of Medtech. This kicks off a series we're doing around the Alex platform and explaining today's session is explaining about how it actually works and a lot of the why. What does it mean to you and your practice? And how do you get involved with Alex? Because it is actually about collaboration and partnering. 25 years ago, I used to work for New South Wales Health in Australia as an epidemiologist, taught how to respond to pandemics. Somewhere along the way, I didn't think that was going to be required in my lifetime. I started working with health IT companies about 20 years ago. And part of the challenge was how do you bring innovation into a software company? And all software companies have different challenges, but how do you collaborate and work together? So one of the initiatives, main reasons for why I led the acquisition of Medtech was a better way for general practice, primary care, to interoperate with other parts of the healthcare system. So what the team's going to talk through today is sort of the mechanics, the hows and the whys, but the fundamental premise is actually about enabling software companies to work together to bring new business models or service models or delivery models of care, while fundamentally respecting the relationship between a practice and doctors and patients, so that software is not usurping that relationship. It's fostering and facilitating that trust that exists. So the team's going to talk about how it's event-driven, it's going to talk about security, it's going to talk about how it's scalable. But the fundamental tenet is there is a relationship between a patient and their practice and their doctor and their clinical team and the administration team that we hold at the top priority. And this is designed deliberately in a way to maintain and protect and enhance that relationship. So I'll hand it over to the team. Please fire your questions on through the chat. If we can't get through all the questions today, we will answer them over time, but I'll hand it over to the team. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I do note that we've got a couple of questions in here about hearing. So it looks like for most, hopefully audio is working, but please do let us know in the chat if you can't hear us for any reason. So we'll do some short introductions because I think for most of you, we're quite a new team. So most of us on the line today are relatively new to Medtech. So we have on the line with us today Lawrence Peterson, who's Medtech's General Manager of Integrations and Infrastructure. So he's the boss man who oversees all Alex operations as well as other integrations. We have myself, Alex Cobble-Chantraine, no relation to the naming of the platform, I do promise. Medtech's Clinical Integrations Product Manager. So what I do is I look for new opportunities to build out the Alex platform to improve clinical workflows and patient outcomes. We also have Reardon Baker, who is our Product Integrations Account Manager, who liaises with our third-party vendors in order to ensure that their Alex experience is smooth and efficient. He also looks for new vendors to join us. And we have Prashanth Koval, who is our Alex product owner and resident standards expert, who makes all of the technical magic happen. So like Jeff said just before we kick off properly, I'll just mention that we do have a Q&A segment at the end of the presentation, but in the event that you do have any questions, especially those that can't wait, please feel free to use the Q&A Zoom question chat box down the very bottom of your screen, and we'll try and address as many of those questions as we can. Any that we can't get to within the time frame of the webinar, we will try to address in a question sort of response that we'll send out to you after the session.
Thank you, Alex. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, everyone. We, in everyday use anywhere between 5 and 25 integrations with our general practice software. These can be forms, they can be lookups to the NES, they can be electronic prescription services. They all happen magically in the background. However, integrations has been a very difficult piece, and it's topical in the market right around the world, not just here in New Zealand, but right around the world when we try and share data to approved parties. The traditional methods have made it really, really hard. Basically, these are largely bespoke. The integration itself comes into the PMS and they say, yes, we'd like to do this. And it's often with only one use case in mind. It often involves connections directly between the practice databases and an individual third-party events product. It also means that there's a deployment process to practices. This can slow things down. It can be difficult to scale. As far as the third-party vendor is concerned, it can be really, really time-consuming, right? When they come to us with an idea to put it into the PMS, we have to often be refactored or rescheduled and re-resourcing our different pieces of work. In times of pandemic, this is no doubt very evident to all of you on the call today, where we've had no less than about 4 different releases around the COVID pandemic in the last 4 months. And this has really had an impact on our PMS. It's important, don't get us wrong, but it has a market impact on our ability to further develop out the PMS and the integrations areas. It is very costly for vendors and new innovators to come into the market. Often when an innovator comes to the PMS or they come to the practice and say, we got this really cool idea, they usually have to come with big, deep pockets, because to get on the board ahead of a whole heap of other stuff, it means that they need a priority, and that business case often needs money up front as proof of life at the end of the project. Often the functionality is not shareable with other third-party vendors, all right? And that's a key thing here. What we're trying to do is open the landscape. And when we've got a particular exclusive piece that's been bought by one vendor, that often stifles innovation in that area. Most of these integrations happen to go through a direct interaction with your database. And in some cases that's done well, in some cases it's done poorly. In all cases, it has an impact on your database, all right? It can create all manner of problems, which we'll go into very shortly at a very high level. And of course, there's the ongoing performance and reliability issues of having these direct connections, all right? When integrations don't automatically update with new functionalities of the product, they can show data in a place where it was not supposed to be stored, or they can have an incorrect format, or worse, they can crash. In the middle of a consultation, no one likes a crash. That integration that's really bright, new and shiny when it's first released often degrades over time, all right? And it takes money and effort to actually keep it up to date, keep it well-oiled and functional for you, the clinicians and the practices. And as I said earlier, there are anywhere at any given time in your practice, you have at least 5 to 25, if not more, of these integrations, all doing their own little thing in the background, some seamlessly, some causing performance problems, others just there and not running. So when we started to look at the integration area, we said, well, what do we want to solve here? We already know that there are many risks out there in the GP space for security these days. We want to help GPs manage their security risks, their cybersecurity risks, the privacy risks. We want to help our customers to enable their customers and to secure them, to enable their data to be secure. And of course, we need to keep our PMS working really, really smooth and operational for you. It's no good having a slow and kludgy PMS when you're trying to simply write a script or look up a pathology result from 2 years ago. Consumers these days are very, very used to having best of breed things. When you look at the telecommunications market, the banking markets, these areas are all opening up to things that the consumer can get access to, can get support on, manages their own data. All of these sorts of things are what a consumer expects these days. Now, there are limits that sometimes it is inappropriate for that consumer to have certain pieces of data, but we do need to get them a level further along that pathway where they can feel that they have access to their data where appropriate. Third parties and funders also find it really, really difficult. We want to free this up. We want to actually minimize the difficulty for third parties to come in and say, hey, Medtech, hey, practice, I've got this awesome idea that I want to bring to bear. They can go away, they can build their awesome idea and they can bring it to market. We want to actually reduce the ongoing maintenance costs. We want to reduce those functional limitations. So it's really about opening up that ecosystem. All right. We want to increase the innovation potential by reducing those entry costs. We want to have an ecosystem, and it's really important that that ecosystem is secure and functional. The clinician needs access to what they need, when they need it, how they need it, not necessarily sitting in a chair. So when we look at the traditional integration model, and I'm going to state up front here, these are high-level diagrams. So I am deliberately speaking very high level here so that the average clinician and the average practice manager will understand the differences between these. There are obviously some technical details which we can build out further with our integrators and our tech savvy people in the audience. Happy to catch up on a separate arrangement. Today is all about getting the baseline out there so that people understand out there in the market, our customers, our practice managers, our clinicians, our nurses, our specialists, and our emergency care providers. This is what Alex is, this is what it is to you, and this is why. So in a traditional integration model, you have a third-party vendor. That third-party vendor essentially connects directly to, in some manner, the database itself, whether that's our Medtech 32 Interbase product or whether that's our SQL Evolution product. In all cases, there is a read-write access given to that database or to that vendor to that database. In some cases, it's only read. In some cases, it's only write. But in all cases, it is complex to define what level of access you define below those levels. There's also a problem here where when you have a direct connection, you do not, it's very difficult to actually throttle the amount of data and the amount of processing that that vendor is actually asking of that database. Sometimes you'll find there's a scheduled agent running there, and it's scheduled at a time to run a query, whether it's a data export mechanism, whether it's an upload mechanism. It could be many different things. All right. In all cases, these are about, in general, get data today in case the patient rolls up at some time in the future. And if that integration stops today, when they roll up in 2 months, that data is often out of date. It's further confluated by the updates and removal of the agent that's required. So when a vendor updates their system, when we update our system, they have to update their system, or when they add functionality, that means there's a deployment process that once again interrupts your practice, where you have to have someone come out on site or dial in remotely and actually add that agent in. All right. So the key problems there essentially is that once that access is given, what data is exactly being taken? And that's something that can be a little bit fuzzy. All right. We like to think that we actually know exactly what is being taken from these databases. Having looked at a number of certification projects of our vendors, I can suggest that whilst even the vendor themselves thought they weren't taking things, at the end of the day, they were, and these things are being remediated as we come across them. We do have, when we start doing these sorts of things, a potential for data corruption, or worse, a clinical mishap. If someone has created an integration and they're looking at the wrong particular coding item in the database, that can create a real problem, as you're aware. All right. The data, of course, is current only on the last extract. So you can see there's a whole heap of moving problems in this current model. What Alex is about is to try and remove those obstacles, to try and firm up the stability, to remove the clinical risks, to increase the security and enhance the experience. Meet Medtech's Application Layer Exchange, or ALEX, for short. And as you can see here, there is no direct connectivity between the vendor product and the practice. And if you look from the left-hand side of the screen there, you will see that there is an application. It could be in a kiosk in a practice. It could be a tablets. It could be any number of things, right? But that application speaks to the particular third-party partner or vendor, and that vendor is given access into the Medtech Azure stack. Now, there's all these technical bits, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about. There is, of course, all manner of securities, web app firewalls, application gateways, roles, and all sorts of things. In the center of this Azure stack is our FHIR Azure API and an integration layer, which does our mapping between FHIR and our Medtech. Out to the right-hand side there, you'll see that there are some, I'm going to call them pink or puce pipes between the practice and the Alex platform. So the practice itself will enable a set of pipes. All right, those pipes will only be enabled into that Alex platform. That does nothing more than open a set of connectivity between the Medtech practice and the Alex platform. At this stage, there are no connections between a third party and the Alex and the practice themselves. The practice must consent to the vendor, and when they can consent to the vendor having access, then down the bottom there you will see we have things called a PMS location function app and a resolution table. These things interact with the APIM services, the management services that allow connectivity to certain parts of the medical record. So that's the overall layer. That's the overall platform. So what makes it different? It is an event-driven platform. It is not the standard mechanism of give me all the data from Medtech 32 practice A. It is a, I have someone in front of me, I need to know about them. I need to ask the right question. I cannot just ask for Jane in the greater northern region of the North Island. All right. I must be asking for a specific piece of data at a specific location, and I must have the right to be able to ask that information. So as part of that consenting process, we actually have at the top right of our screen there, Medtech 32A says, I only want to use this particular application. They consent to that application and we enable it in the background. And then essentially that third party B can ask for a specific set of information. That information pertains to things called roles. Different vendors will get different roles, and different roles have access to different pieces of your information. Our kiosk role has access to the basics, patient information and appointments and location, practice location information and provider information. Our portal has a various layered approach, our portal role, in that it gives things access to things like conditions, medications, health summary information. All right. And then there's, of course, a different layer on top of that, which is confidential and non-confidential. So should you mark something as confidential, it does not go up the pipe. And a very easy example of this is if we look at our third-party app B, they have the role of patient demographics, appointments, and an IPS, which is a patient summary. And if they request an IPS for a patient at facility 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because our facility out the top right-hand side is given consent, they are allowed through the pipes, gets mapped, and the data is, they make a request and the data is passed back to them. That request is made using modern technologies, API requests and posts and things, and it is using the FHIR interoperability language, okay, for want of a better way of putting it. In essence, that connects through. Now, there's no data lake in the cloud there, all right? There's nothing to see here, right? We do not keep data lakes in our cloud. We essentially have a request mechanism that allows that request, where it is approved, into the practice, the request is made and it passes the data back. Okay, so there's lots of comms backwards and forwards. And of course, any of the throttling that's going to occur so that the vendor does not suck the life out of your database while they're making a huge query actually occurs in the cloud platform itself. That's a very high overview. But as you can see, when we have a Medtech Evolution D, they have a slightly different role. They've given access to 2 people, but they've only given access to certain roles. All right, so it's these roles and responsibilities. Alex will talk to the consenting model shortly, and that will actually explain a little bit more about what that process is. But at the end of the day, this is about enabling full transparency for the practice and the practice manager, clinicians on site, to know exactly what it is that they are wishing to do, who they're dealing with, and what it is they have access to. I'll hand now back to Alex.
So what can Alex do so far? So Lawrence and Jeff have said previously that Alex came to life last year with a couple of different roles. Lawrence very, very helpfully went through what those roles mean and the permissions that are associated with them. So we did start out by building out the kiosk and appointments role because, one, it was essential for our early adopters, and two, in terms of clinical risk, it was actually a relatively low risk area to begin. We figured if somebody misses a medication, that's quite dangerous. If somebody misses an appointment, that's a little less dangerous than missing a medication. So through the kiosk and appointments role, our partners can now both read and write back appointments into your Medtech appointment book. They can update patient demographic contact details, and they can create a new record for brand new patients. So that one came just at the end of last year and is quite exciting for us. We also built out, like Lawrence said, 2 different patient portal roles to accommodate the needs of our other early adopters, one with access to items of confidential scope and one without. So one that does have that access, one that doesn't, in the event that if something is marked confidential, it's not going to shoot through to the most patient portal roles. Within the patient portal role, the International Patient Summary, which is part of our FHIR standard, is available. That summary is quite meaty and includes quite a few different things within the health record. It's essentially a health summary and can include prescribed medications, conditions, labs, screenings, and more. But the option there excludes unnecessary pieces where necessary or inappropriate. Toward the end of last year, we also built out the provider inbox writebacks, which was actually quite a useful piece that was essential for a lot of our early adopters. And that means that a document or a patient request can come directly into your Medtech inbox through Alex. And this somewhat kicked off what we're looking to build out this year. So if we can move to the next slide, that would be fab. Excellent. So this looks at what we're looking at this year in 2022. We're looking to build out what we're calling clinical information exchange, which is essentially what it sounds like. We want to build out the capability for our partners with appropriate roles and permissions to be able to write back clinical information into Medtech. So that can include medications, screenings, consult notes, and more. So we envision this happening in 2 different categories. Most writebacks would fall into the first category, which is going to require approval before being added into your Medtech. This could be something like a medication that was prescribed by or an observation taken by a clinician external to the practice, wherein a clinician within the practice must then approve that addition before it can be added to your Medtech records. The potential for this could also be a biometrics device that a patient is using that can then be added in. The other side that we see being crucial is the direct write back into your Medtech. So this would bypass that approval process. This is only for the situations where clinicians within your practice are using multiple systems. We see a lot of this in aged care. Essentially, what we're trying to do is avoid having to double key the same information, like medications or consult notes, into 2 separate systems. So that can just lead to all kinds of clinical errors. We want to avoid that, in addition to the time wasting that produces. We'll also be looking to bring forms into Alex by modernizing how they work. So we think this will enable forms authors and publishers to be more fluid and innovative in their approach, and ultimately improve the experience of those who are using forms regularly in practice. We're also hoping that this means that in due time, that future proofing is going to mean that those forms don't break when we have updates. The last piece of clinical information exchange will be enhancing the Medtech PMS direct interactions with Alex by modernizing our current integrations with key stakeholders, such as those with the NES or NZEPS, as well as working with upcoming HIRA developments as they come in order to better enable that modern health ecosystem. Ultimately, however, we want Alex to be able to solve the problems that you in the practice are encountering. So we really want to know what you want to see available in the platform. And can we hit the next slide? Aha, so who's working with Alex? We actually have quite a list of folks who aren't included on this slide, who are just in those early stages of getting into Alex. but some partners have already made Alex a full-on reality. As of, I think, last June is when we went live with our first practice. So in our sandbox, which is essentially where we have partners who can develop against and get their products working with Alex, they kind of can play around and figure it all out. We currently have Ask Your Team, ProCare, SmartTech 21, and a number of others busily working away. Those who are coming soon are right on the cusp of going live. So those folks, so that's Heartbeat, Well Revolution, Akeso, Venza, these guys are just getting those finishing touches ready. So we should be seeing them go live imminently. And on the right-hand side, we've got who's live now. So that's exactly what it sounds like. These folks are out in the wild already working with Alex in practices. It includes ConnectMed, JX, WebTools Health, Florence, and Houston Productivity. And can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Love having somebody to move the slides for me. It's excellent. So now the important bit. So what do you need to do in order to prepare for Alex? As Lawrence alluded to earlier, a key tenet of the Alex platform is transparency and consent. As a result, we have two forms of consent that are required for connections to be made through Alex. The first is just the consent to enabling the platform itself. So this essentially means that Alex is turned on and ready in the practice, but third parties aren't connecting just yet. For any third parties to connect, we will need the second part of the consent process, which is the consent for that third party to connect to your practice, which can be provided with evidence of an agreement or relationship with your practice. The consent form to activate Alex is coming soon to a brand new section of your Insight portal called the Market Space. In that Market Space, you'll not only be able to find the consent form, but you'll be able to find information about Alex partners, how to get in touch with those partners if you're interested, etc. If you want to get Alex activated in your practice before the Market Space is available, we will have our team contact you at the end of the session. We'll have an email contact on the screen during the Q&A, so you'll be able to flick us an email and let us know, and we'll be happy to send you a consent form and any other information you're looking for. That email address will also be a great place to contact us with any suggestions for third-party vendors that you'd like to see integrated with your Medtech PMS. Another side of Alex is that some of you out there may want to integrate one of your own products with Alex. So some of you we've seen have developed your own integrations, or you're looking for how to integrate with your PMS. You can do that via Alex. We do have a practice integration process, so please get in touch with us and we can discuss next steps. And if we move to the next one. Yeah, perfect. So this webinar itself actually kicks off a webinar series about Alex and the process, the journey we've taken. So this particular webinar focuses on the Alex platform, what it is that we do, the story of it, why we've done this. But we actually have several webinars coming up over the next few weeks where our Alex partners will be talking about their Alex journey and what their products can do for your practice. So keep an eye on your inboxes for that. It's worth noting this will also not be our last Alex webinar series. The fact that the Alex platform is evolving and will continue to evolve means that we want to evolve with it. We want to keep you up to date with what's new as it comes, including new partners connecting through Alex. However, it's fully understood that spare time is not easy to come by in primary care, especially in pandemic times. So we will be recording all of these webinars and popping them into the Market Space section of your Insight portal as soon as it comes live. Okay. And I think we've moved on to our question and answer section. We've whizzed through, we got half an hour worth of presentation.
There's a couple of questions that have popped up on the chat.
Yeah.
So, Lawrence, do the forms mean advanced forms?
Certainly does. Certainly does. Advanced forms as they currently stand do work. What we're looking to do is we're currently hampered by some legacy tech that those advanced forms connect to in Medtech, right? What we want to do is we want to actually redirect the Medtech PMS to be utilizing the Alex interface, the Alex API data set or resources. By doing that, what we should actually achieve is a much greater access to data, a granular level of roles and security, but also the ability for vendors to be innovative, right? So that Medtech isn't hampering or limiting what they can do. So we will look to build that out and make it a lot better. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we're going to be suddenly turning off advanced forms tomorrow. What it does mean is that we are going to be working with some of our vendors that are already speaking to us around how best to bring this new Alex Forms tech to bear.
Yes, I think that's really key part. This isn't shutting down previous ways of people doing information sharing and compiling forms and like. It's actually using more reliable and stable technology. Some of that form approaches are quite old, and so we will always support the current capabilities around those forms, but that over time will be replaced, we expect. That's an important thing. There's a question here of, is this a HealthLink lookalike? As a former executive of HealthLink and part owner of HealthLink, no, it's not a HealthLink lookalike. What it essentially does is a very different approach to information exchange, because you're talking about an application to application type scenario. Now, some of the use cases that people do, in theory, and will over time, will be replace messaging systems, because you can do it real time. So HealthLink relies on a stored and forward method, which is fine, and it works. And there's no different to, forms work as well. There's no problem with that. But if you need instantaneous information and you need to do it in a different way, so it's application to application, this is a better methodology. So it's not a HealthLink lookalike. It's probably generation step forward in the way of looking how applications and software talk to each other is probably a better description. HealthLink's a partner of Medtech, will continue to be a partner of Medtech, and we expect that over time, some innovation will come through HealthLink and others of how do you share information. There is a question about cost. To enable Alex at a practice, cost of practice, nothing. Medtech, it's part of your Medtech license, and there's no cost for Alex to a practice for the API. It's part of the product, one of their description. So it's part of your licensing fees and support fees. If you want to use one of the Alex partners application, surprise, they're going to charge you. So that's between you and them of whether you wish to use their products and services or not. We obviously have commercial and technical relationships with those partners. The previous methodology costs nothing. Use one of the Alex enabled application. That's obviously a free market and how that works and how people want to charge for their applications. There's another question, Lawrence, around forms from Nikki. Is that Alex connectivity relating to the web forms or Windows forms? Will the practice still be able to build their advanced forms for internal uses?
Yes, look, I think for some time now, the current functionality of those advanced forms inside of Medtech's Evolution PMS will certainly exist. I think they're going to continue to exist after this as well, right? So the practice themselves, it is not our intention to limit your ability to enhance your workflows, to enhance the way you do things and the tools in your practice. So I'm sure there's a lot of practices out there, not just the corporate ones, but certainly some of those more innovative practices who have workflows and things that they're going to want to be doing. Simply because we're looking to other mechanisms to pass data between a form, a web form, whether that form is stored in the cloud, on your own cloud, on your own premise, using your own web server, that in my mind has no bearing on this. What it does is it allows, we will be working very tightly or very hard to actually make sure that we're not limiting what you can do there other than ensuring its security, all right? So, and that goes for not just for the practice, but the vendors themselves, All right. So it's really about enabling that tech. We don't want to be building forms. It's not what we do. We are a PMS vendor. All right. We want to actually be enhancing our PMS product, and we want to be enabling people who have cool ideas and innovations and good ways of doing things. So the forms, I'm basically going to say Alex Forms is going to be a mechanism to enable you to use your form in our world, in our PMS world. All right.
Yeah, I think it's a key question there, Nikhil, is, hey, if you're doing some cool advanced forms, keep doing it. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. As the different methodologies and technologies come into play, have a look at it. And if it makes sense for you, great. If it doesn't make sense and your advanced forms do the business flows you're after, keep doing it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a question from Matthew McDonald. Will the FHIR API be able to take macrons in a create patient request and then put that into the Medtech Evo database for Maori names? Now, Prashant, I'm pretty sure the FHIR extension of IPS does look to deal with macrons as part of Maori names. Is that correct?
I haven't seen extension for Maori names. Like we have to look at, we have to contact the NZ IG team, the implementation team, like who are working with the FHIR aspects, like to check whether we have something where we can push some Maori names in, like, you know.
Okay, well, thanks. So we'll come back to you on that one, Matthew. But Medtech is looking to be able to cope with macrons as part of the Evo database, and that work's been slated to come into this year. I'd be very surprised if the work being done by HISO and HL7 New Zealand is not trying to address this matter as well, Matthew. So we'll give an undertaking to follow up with HL7 New Zealand and HISO to see how that is actually progressing. And as I said, the PMS will be able to handle macrons later this year. And then obviously that transfer of information will start to work a lot better. I hope that answers your question, Matthew. Okay. Any other questions for the team?
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat, so I'll just read them aloud, Jeff. Sure. So, current existing method of message exchange over HealthLink, this approach will be obsolete/replaced using this exchange gateway, using Alex integration layer?
Yeah, yes and no. It depends. So you're talking about HealthLink that has 20 odd years experience and connections across the landscape. There are some new models of transfer of information that will replace certain functionality. HealthLink themselves are a partner to Medtech. So we expect that some of those things will come into play in that sense. But you got to appreciate that the ecosystem is actually quite big and vast and diverse. So over time, I think you'll see a migration away from stored and forward messaging. As I said, having worked at HealthLink for 10 years, Lawrence worked at HealthLink for 15 years. Over time, we see that will change. And it's going to do with those scenarios and use cases where you need an answer now. So you need a result now, you need a booking now, you need information, you need to make sure the person's read that information. That's where you'll start to see stored and forward messaging, I would argue, being replaced. But the general rule is in transfer of care, as long as you beat the patient to the other end, is usually all that's required. But if you want to know you've got a booking now and you've got that transfer of care now, you'll need to look at different models, which is what the Alex platform starts to deal with. But happy to talk to you separately, Lily, if you want to know some more. As I said, Lawrence and I have been working in that space for a long time.
We have one more question. So how patient privacy is addressed, taken care of, when a third party wants patient clinical data from the PMS?
I'll crack at that. So the way the privacy is addressed is each practice will have an arrangement with their application provider of choice. And because what the Alex layer does that provider gets access to limited resources or data fields as part of that resource profile. So if you're a kiosk provider, for argument's sake, you get access to kiosk appointment-related information, maybe demographics. Okay, so you're consenting to that. And you also, the practice can get records, and we're providing ways so that the practice can see what information is being taken, what information, how often it's been taken, that type of scenario as well. Unlike the opaqueness that currently is in play, where you put an agent on your system and you don't know exactly what happens, this is very, very deliberate and very, very prescribed. We've also had independent securities, independent privacy impact assessment, and we do that regularly as well. And because we're doing standards-based, what you see is what you get in terms of what's going on. So you can look at, what am I signing up for when I use this resource profile, this FIRE resource profile, for example. Very, very different to the way it currently works, Lily. And as Lawrence alluded to, it's what's been going on is probably the Wild West is the best description. Under this model, it's very, very deliberate, so that you're consenting as a practice to Alex, you're consenting to an application, and you've got visibility of what's going on. That's a very big difference.
Jeff,
that helps.
Jeff, if I may just add one layer to that.
Sure.
Whilst we have a consenting process in play for the practice, and that meets most scenarios, there may well be scenarios where patient consent is requested from the GP themselves, right, or from the practice. We actually have a model in play now where part of one of the new features that you saw Alex allude to earlier about an inbox right was an inbox right of a patient consent. So where patient consent is explicitly required, we can indeed have the third-party vendor push that patient consent into the inbox for review and approval. So there's that additional layer that we can go to if and when we need.
Yeah, and I think the key thing with this, Lily, and people out there, this has been very, very deliberately done as event-driven. I have publicly spoken against data lakes, which is where you take a copy of the database, you put it up into the cloud somewhere, and then one day that person might turn up at some facility and then we'll pull some information down. That is the riskiest behaviour in this country. I won't name the organisations who do that, but I professionally and personally think that is the biggest risk to privacy. Then Jeff is standing in front of a doctor after an hour's clinic, and he's now saying, yes, you can get my data from my enrolled practice about me and only about me. That is a very powerful approach to what we're doing, because there is clear consent and need at the time of the information request. But as Lawrence said, we can also, some of these applications require additional patient consent. This is supporting that as well. But taking data out of mass, out of the back of PMS systems, because one day a patient may turn up somewhere, is an unnecessary risk in my personal and professional opinion. This is probably a good question. I don't know the exact version. Is there a Medtech version that the practice must be in order to continue to connect to Alex? I think Alex CC might know the exact version number. The minimum version number, Alex?
Not quite the minimum version number. So I believe there's not necessarily a version requirement for Alex itself to function. However, there are going to be certain things that work, certain features, for example, the inbox write back. Generally, if you are within the last 2 versions of Medtech, if I remember that correctly. So if you've updated to the most recent update or version number for Medtech Evolution or for Medtech 32, or the one immediately preceding that, that's safe for those features. But actually having Alex connectability, at this stage, we don't have a version requirement for Medtech.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware.
Basically, the strength of this is if you use an application and you update from 32 for Evolution, for example, this thing will still work. It's not sort of, oh no, I've updated Evolution, that functionality I had is going to disappear. It still works, okay? So that's one of the advantages to it. But there is a point, as Alex is saying, of all Medtech products is N-1 is the expression. The current version plus the previous version, theoretically, is all Medtech is supposed to be supporting and warranting. Okay, Lee made a good point. Robert has asked a question, what about events triggered inside the PMS, single sign-on into a third-party system using the PMS credentials? Why don't you have a crack at that one?
Absolutely. So when I talk about Alex forms, that is absolutely intention. The idea of single sign-on using the identity of the doctor that is in the PMS so that you don't have to sign on or use a token or use a cert or have a cert or all of these sorts of things. We want to start making things easier. And in my mind, don't quote me on this, but the way I see the workflow working is that somehow in MedTech, you will be in patient context. You will say, I want to do this awesome form, and you click it and away it goes. Now it brings in all of the smart tech of the third-party vendor. It transposes all of the data that it is allowed to transpose so that you don't have to worry about it, and it signs you on with the appropriate credentials. So absolutely, single sign-on is a must. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and we're working with a number of partners, particularly around the aged care space, so aged care software application providers. And this is obviously a common complaint. I'm in Medtech, I've got to go to OneChart or Medimap or BCare or whatever. And I don't want to have to sort of swap around all the time. And so this is a key use case. And obviously the credentialing part, because it's an API, you can API off the credentials of the provider who's in play at the time, as well as of the patient who's on pallet or who's on the record at the moment. So yes, that's a key part. And in doing this, we keep track of those of the audit trail as well to know what's going on. So that's a key thing as well. Thanks for a good question, Robert. Nearly stopped us, but not quite. Any other questions coming through? Lily did make a comment, trust-based systems to evidence-based. Couldn't agree more. Current cloud implementations has limitations. Can we please address this? I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, Lily, but the API approach works on your on-premise 32 Evolution, or you're hosted in the cloud, whether it's Medtech cloud or whether it's third-party cloud. This has been designed to work in any of those environments, and it does work in any of those environments. So I'm not sure exactly what your question's specifically to, Lily, but you can again contact us and we can work out how we can improve those things. I'm just watching two screens here very badly.
Yeah.
I'm watching the chat and I'm watching the Q&A.
I think we're just about at time. So final questions, and if there are no further questions, we can bid you adieu for the day. Thank you for attending.
Can I just I'll do my email address, Lily. Lily who's written the question. I will type my answer to my email address, Lily, and you can send me your query and I'll get one of my able technical people who's smarter than me on this stuff to work out how we can understand your problems, make sure I type my email correct properly. And that's my, did I just do that? I think I did.
I think that did it. Yep.
Did it do it? I think it did it.
Yep. It did.
My email popped up. Okay, great. So Lily, if you want to write to me separately about how to contact you, and I'll go from there. Hey, thanks a lot for the time people have taken. Hey guys, this business is genuine in its belief of listening to its users, and particularly our partners and all people in and around the wider primary care ecosystem. We can only get better if you give us advice on how to get better. So please keep sending through your words of encouragement, fair criticism, and if you've got problems, we're happy to try and resolve those.
That's why we're here.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.